Good morning. It's great to see all of you in the room. Welcome everyone who's gathered with us online. This is essentially, for our purposes, the first Sunday of what is known traditionally as Advent. I assume a lot of us are probably longing for some sense of normalcy and some sense of the way things used to be and all the things that happen. If anything, Thanksgiving kind of reminded me of how over all the COVID stuff I am. Anybody like with me on that one? It's just like, but it's going to be with us for a while longer. And so we, just like we began when we talked about in March, we said that we know that God has purposes in every single thing that He allows us to endure. And those purposes are given to us, or we're allowed to endure them for the work that He wants to do in us. And we just got to stay in it until then. But there's a posture that we can have as we stay in this. And that's what I want us to focus on during this Advent season. Advent essentially means arrival, or to await someone's arrival, particularly in the church, in the Christian church. We were awaiting on Jesus. And this is celebrated at Christmas because we were sort of a nod to the fact that the people of God were awaiting a long-awaited Messiah. They were looking for a long-awaited Messiah to come, someone to rescue them. And then for us today, we are still looking forward to the second return of Jesus. So it celebrates all those things. It's historically done, celebrating hope and joy and peace, and then culminating on love. But I want to spend this entire holiday kind of preparation, Advent season, just focused on joy, because I assume we could all use a little joy, right? So that's what we're going to be doing. So in order to do this, I've been thinking about this. I don't know how many of you guys have a really good definition of joy. And we kind of know what it is when we see it, but we don't necessarily know how to define it. So I've spent the last few weeks, really a bit longer, trying to come up with a definition of joy, something that will help us, so we can hold on to, that allows us to see this during this season. And so I want to give us some tools. I want to give us some help so that we can not only experience joy, we can bring joy bringers to the world around us. And there are some simple ways we can be joy bringers. There's enough joy stealers in our world. We need some joy bringers. So that's what we're going to work on for the next few weeks. For those of you who've been around for a long time, you know that I've been married to Julie. We've been married 28 years, and I'm married to sunshine. If you've ever interacted with her, you know that it's always like she's always bright and bubbly. And so is she like this all the time? I'm like, from the moment she wakes up, it starts. Like first thing, boom, and it's up. It's like full on sunshine. It's like, can I get a little shade for just a minute? Nope, it's full on sunshine. And so this is the way my world has been for the last 28 years. In fact, it's so funny because in the morning time, she wakes up and she's ready to go. Now, in the morning, oftentimes I get up before she does, and I'm super quiet. I get out of bed, so I don't wake her up because it's usually before anybody should get up, and I'll go in and I'll do my stuff, or I'll get some coffee. And then when it gets a little bit later, time to get up, like normal time to get up, I make her coffee. And I take it to her in the bed, which I've been bringing her coffee in bed for the last 20-something years probably. So I bring her coffee in bed, and she looks up at me with one eye, and she says, "Oh, thank you," like it's the first time I've ever done it. This is every single day. It's like it's the same sunshine all the time. So a couple years ago, it comes in handy a lot. But a couple of years ago, we were going to, about this time of year, we were going to Christmas, Thanksgiving, getting ready for the Christmas season. And one of our traditions is we go to Airlie Gardens. And if you're from Wilmington, you know that Airlie Gardens is a beautiful garden here in our community. They decorate it with lights at Christmas time. It's all, set up. It's beautiful, lights everywhere. All this, you kind of walk through, and it's outside, which is important to note. Because a couple of years ago, we had our tickets. You have to buy tickets way in advance, and you just get the night you get, and that's what you get. So we had bought tickets. Julie bought tickets. We were going with a couple of our friends and other families. We were all going together to Airlie Gardens to experience the beauty, get ready for Christmas, and just all the joy that it brings. And we go, on the particular night we're going, it is freezing cold, and it is pouring down rain. And you know what starts to happen when you're about to go on an outdoor garden walk through the lights, and it's freezing cold, and it's pouring down rain? People start complaining. So we're in the car, people are complaining, "Oh, should we go? Should we not go? Should we go? This is going to be miserable, blah, 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 blah." And she's like, "Oh, no. We're going to have fun. There's going to be joy tonight." And so here's how she said, "So everybody do this in the car. Everybody just say, joy." And so that's what we did. We're like, okay, joy. So we get out of the car, we get there, we go through the thing, we get our hot chocolate because it's the only place where it's sheltered. We get out, it's cold, it's rainy, and it's miserable, just like we all thought. And every time someone starts complaining, Julie would just go, joy. Joy. We're like, okay, it's joy. And we kept going, and by the end of the night, we're all like, joy to everybody, joy. See, try this, it works. Try this, ready? Everybody put your fists together. Now you gotta make a noise when you do it. You hear it? So you gotta go, joy. All right, put your notepads down and get your phone here. Everybody get your hands up. At home, do the same thing. So you got kids climbing over. You just need to get them off of you for a second and go, come on, right here. Everybody play along. Hands together, ready? Let me hear you. Joy. Do it again. That wasn't very good. Do it. Joy. One more time. Yes. How'd that feel? Don't you can just feel you're smiling. It's all good. We're all good. And like, that's what happens. This is what happened the whole night. Nothing in our circumstances changed. Nothing changed. But the way we approached things, the way we enjoyed that night changed dramatically, all because we were reminded that something else is available. Now, this is really what joy does. As I've been thinking about this, the word that comes to mind is this idea that joy is pervasive. The power that of joy has the capacity to reach in and under and through every other emotion that we feel. And in this season, we feel a lot of those deeply. Some of us are exhausted. Some of us are tired. Some of us are frustrated. Some of us are, and the gamut, runs the gamut. And joy, this idea, this way has the power to reach underneath, to be reminded that there's something more available to us. This is exactly how Jesus is introduced to the world. The angels show up, and here's how it reads. If you have seen Charlie Brown, you'll recognize this. Luke chapter 2. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby. Remember this, Linus? And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. And the angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. These angels show up, and they were terrified. But the angel says to them, do not be afraid, for I bring you good news that will cause great joy. I've read this a ton of times through my whole life, and I just mark down the words, good news that will cause great joy. And so I began to reflect on this, and I realized that there's a joy that we've been offered, and it's a great joy. It has some force to it, some power to it, some capacity to change and shape other things, and ultimately there is something that causes this. So my question is, what is it that causes you joy? What's the cause? What's the source of your joy? So I began to do kind of a deep dive throughout the Bible and just trying to understand, and a lot in Psalms about joy and singing and declaration. Tay, I mentioned earlier here in our room that our bodies, the fact that we can offer ourselves is a posture of worship, of saying there's something happens in the Hebrew culture. Emotions weren't to be stuffed, but emotions were actually cues. They were actually be felt in the body. They were very important. And what it would do is it would kind of trigger, or it would allow for us to have an appropriate response. So something good happens, you exude joy. There was a singing, a gladness, a celebration, praise. All these things were a part of this, and you see this all throughout the scriptures. What I notice is there's a couple of things that just go underneath both the Old Testament and the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16. You can memorize this verse. We can all do it together. It's just two words. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 simply says, rejoice always. Right? You just memorized the verse. Some of you goes, I can't memorize anything. You just memorized a verse out of the Bible. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 says what? Rejoice always. Piece of cake. And what it says is there is never not a time when rejoicing isn't appropriate. Rejoice always. Psalm 118, he records it like this. He says, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. To be glad in something. There's no circumstance that qualifies it or says this is the reason you should rejoice. It just says you do it always, and this is where you are. Both of those are cause for us to rejoice and to be glad. These are commands that are given. God is not indifferent into how we feel and how we respond to the emotions that are in us. And you go through, and what you begin to see is you begin to notice some things, that joy often emerges from pain. From pain. Though sorrow lasts for a nighttime, joy emerges in the morning like the sun. You see things, it says that joy is actually found in pain. Joy and sorrow can actually go together simultaneously. It's the power of joy. You can have sorrow and you can find joy in that sorrow, not when it dissipates or when it lessens or when it goes away or finds relief. It's in the middle of it. This is in 2 Corinthians 6. Joy remains available for us after we endure. This is how the writer of Hebrews recounts Jesus' journey, who for the joy that is set before him caused him or allowed him to endure. There's a joy that is recalled. For some of us, we have to recall things. It says, to restore to me the joy of my salvation. Let me feel again what I once felt. In Psalm chapter 92, verse 4, he says that you make me glad by your deeds. I will sing for the work that your hands have done. Sometimes there's a recalling, there's a past, that we rejoice in the things that have happened that we have seen with our own eyes and experienced in our lives. All these are reasons for joy. It's in, it's during, it's before, it's after. And what I began to notice is that joy is available now, right now, and it is unrelated to my circumstances. That was kind of the big aha for me. There's a joy that is available to you right now. Boom, when it's raining, cold, and miserable. And it's available to you right now, and it is not threatened or subjected to the fact that it's cold or rainy or miserable or hard or sad or lonely or fearful. It's not threatened by those things. There's a pervasiveness to joy that keeps it from becoming or being circumstantial. Psalm chapter 21, I think, begins to give us some clues. He says, surely you have granted him. And this is the king is writing. So he's writing this third person like, Mike is preaching and Mike's going to tell you a story and Mike's going to read a psalm. That's what he's doing. So it's kind of weird, but that's what he's doing in Psalm chapter 21. Surely you have granted him unending blessings, and you have made him glad with the joy of your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord, and through the unfailing love of the Most High, he will not be shaken. What I began to notice is a couple of things in here. Number one is you cannot just choose joy. That's a really common saying. Just choose joy. You can't just choose it because you got to feel it. Something has to happen in you in order for joy to actually be able to touch and to get to those places where it becomes sustaining, it becomes a force to be reckoned with. It's something you feel. It is an emotion, but it's more. I'm not talking about just positive thinking and saying things are going to be better. I'm saying to actually have something awaken in you that causes you to smile and to feel and to experience gladness, even though things aren't like you wanted them to be. And the second thing is you cannot depend on your circumstances. We all assume that joy is circumstantial, and that's what I want to think about or pause is to consider the cause of it. You can't rationalize or reason yourself into this. You can't just choose it, and you can't depend on your circumstances for it. So what in the world do we do? What a lot of us end up doing, and I want you to pay very close attention to me because I think this is why a lot of us stay frustrated and we frustrate people around us. Because what happens is we have this idea of joy. We've experienced joy before. We know what it feels like, and then we set our lives out to chase that same thrill that we experienced earlier. We're sort of chasing the residual, the thrill of the joy and not the joy itself. We pursue that. We try to recover the emotion that we once had. We try to use songs, we try to use events, we try to recover. We're always chasing to find out how to get back the thing that we once had. And if you're older than me, you're going to experience this one way. And if you're younger than me, you're going to experience this in another. How is that for not offending anybody? A lot of us, you try to recover or to recreate the experiences that you had in order to recover the emotions that you felt. So nostalgia becomes a big deal. You're always trying to go back when things were this way. So you create everything in your life to make it like it used to be. And then you're frustrated when people don't get into things the way you do when they're not the way they used to, when it doesn't feel like it felt when it used to be that way. And so we're always trying, this is why things start to look better in the past, the good old days. Can't we go back to the way things were? This is what's happening to us with all the COVID chaos. We keep talking about going back to normal, back to the way things were, trying to recover an emotion that is actually available to us right here in the middle of it. But we've got to learn how to find it. We've got to be reminded that there's something more. For some of you, right, you're just out of college and you've got responsibilities because maybe you got a job that you actually have to show up at. Or I guess you did until work at home. But anyway, you get the idea. You have to show up. You have responsibilities. Some of you got married. Some of you had children. And you're frustrated that you don't have the community or the flexibility or the freedom like you did back when it was really good. And so you think there's always this trick to getting back. If I could just, some of you are chasing from thing to thing to thing, from church to church to church, trying to find the community that you had when you were in college because you were in a dorm room and you all lived together and you all hung out together and you didn't have much else to do. And you keep trying to recreate that experience by recreating those circumstances. And you just chase and you chase and you chase, not recognizing you're in a new season. And there's a new way in which you need to learn how to live, but that joy is still available to you right there in that moment in a more powerful way than what you even recognize. But we just chase and we try to recreate and we spend our times frustrated that we can't get that back and frustrated with other people and they're not helping us or participating with us in our plan to recreate our joy because it's not circumstantial, right? It's interesting that when Julie at Early Gardens, nothing on the outside changed, but something on the inside did. Something happened in us that caused us to smile, to feel, to laugh, soaking wet, and then we just started doing this to everybody. Whole movement began at Early Gardens. So what is this? It's interesting. Y'all know I love neuroscience and all that. Now, I read, found this, was actually recommended by some of our staff, a book called The Other Half of the Church. And it really talks about the dynamics between our right brain and our left brain, between the spreadsheet side of us and the artsy side of us, right? For those of you who are spreadsheet people, you are a left-brained person. For those of you who we can't ever figure you out, you're a right-brained person. So that's kind of the two scopes. So both of these are important. Both of these are critical to the way you and I experience and learn. Like joy is not a rational thing. You're not going to will yourself or reason yourself into joy in difficult circumstances. There's something deeper. There's a research done at UCLA, secular university, secular group researching this. They discovered that the fundamental drive of human beings is to pursue joy. Call it happiness, but he began to define this a little bit differently, talked about joy. They were using this to study what all of us are familiar with, is this idea of attachment and attachment theory and bonding and all the things that happen. We know that when children are first born, their attachment to their mother is a really important thing. Their attachment to their father is a really important thing. You know, there's science that all backs this up. This is why the neonatal units are so important, and human touch and all those things are so important because it creates a bond. It creates an attachment, a trust. And he starts talking about this. He makes this connection between our pursuit of joy and this idea of attachment. This is how he defines joy. This comes from someone who is studying this scientifically. He said, joy is the thing that we feel or experience when we know that someone is glad with us. And he all of a sudden defined joy relationally. Relationally. So you're going, okay. That makes no sense at all. So let me see if I can help it to make some sense. When Jesus emerges on the scene and he's talking about a lot of things that he's going to be doing and he's going to be his teaching, and one of the places that we have this is when he's with his disciples right before his crucifixion. He's about to be crucified, and then if you know the end of the story, right, he rises from the dead, he's resurrected, and then creates this movement that we still are a part of today. And so in there, he washes his disciples' feet, he celebrates Passover with them. There's all this intimate, he's teaching them very, very specifically about some things that are to come. And he mentions some things in there over and over again, things like this in John 14:14. He says, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask of me anything in my name, and I will do it. In John 15, he talks about remain in me and I'll remain in you. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing. He says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. You see language like this. He goes on, he says, I've told you these things so that my joy will be in you and that your joy might be full, complete, not needing anything else, sufficient. When you're full, you don't need anything else. You didn't push away from Thanksgiving dinner and go, oh, I think I'll go to McDonald's. Why? Because you were full. You didn't need anything else. So here's this promise. My joy, Jesus says, my joy will be in you and your joy will be full. And then if you keep reading, here's where he starts talking about this a little bit more specifically, because he starts talking about, I'm going away for a little while and then you're going to see me again. And his disciples are like, what is he talking about? What is he talking about? So here's what Jesus says in verse 19 of chapter 16 of the book of John, the Gospel of John. Jesus saw they wanted to ask him about this. So he said to them, are you asking one another what I meant when I said in a little while I'll see you no more, and then after a while you'll see me again? Is that what y'all are talking about? I love the way we get these interactions with Jesus. His disciples are mumbling. He's like, well, what are you saying? Very truly, I tell you, verse 20, that you will weep and you will mourn while the world rejoices, and you will grieve, but your grief will turn into joy. There's going to come a moment when this switch happens, when something that you thought was going to be one way emerges and something else arises in it. Then he gives an illustration. A woman who is giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of the joy that her child has been born into the world. This is the only reason we keep having children, is because you forget what it was like. It's the only reason. So you get past like 3, you go, I don't remember how terrible it was when they were small. You're like, oh my gosh, and you do it again, and you remember all over again, then it goes away, and it was replaced by something else. So what Jesus is saying is he's acknowledging that circumstances can bring us joy. There are things that we experience that bring us joy. They're just not full. Right? We had this last night. If you've been around Port City a long time, you know how much I loathe decorating for Christmas. And so it is that time of year, and yesterday we decorated, great attitude, piece of cake. In fact, this is how it went. Last night I'd gotten all the stuff out of the attic, which is not terrible, but I got all down to the attic and saw it sitting in a thing, and we're gonna put it up bit by bit. Well, our 2 daughters and my son-in-law all came over last night for dinner. So we're all sitting around eating dinner, and we're like, let's decorate the tree. And so, man, we've got Christmas music on. And the worst part is putting the lights on the Christmas tree. I just, for whatever reason, And so anyway, last night, they're all there, and they just put the whole thing up and put the lights on. I was like, this is the best Christmas decorating day ever. And Julie's sitting there, and she's seeing her kids, and we're all sitting there as a family. She says, this makes my heart so happy. I'm like, me too, for very different reasons, though. Circumstances can make you happy. They can bring you a sense of joy. One is temporary, like they did what I didn't want to do, so that makes me joyful. And the other one was relational. One is transactional, one is relational. This is really important for you to think about because of what Jesus says next. He goes and he says, so it is with you. Now is your time for grief, verse 22. Now is your time for grief, but I will see you again and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. When you see me again, no one will take away your joy. In that day, you will no longer ask me for anything. Very truly, I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask for in my name. And what a lot of us do is go, that's how I get what I want. I just ask in his name. And what you fail to understand is what Jesus is trying to do is to keep you from thinking that your joy is circumstantial, so your relationships all become transactional, and he's trying to flip that. If that's your thought, if that's why you're frustrated in your prayer life, you have missed the point of what Jesus came to do. When Jesus was born into this world, the name that he was given is Emmanuel, which means God is with us. In that day, you will no longer ask me for anything. Very truly, I tell you that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Until now, verse 24, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you'll receive, and your joy will be complete. Let me ask you something. If you get everything you ask for, does that make you joyful? Some of you are like, yeah. No, it makes you a spoiled brat is what it makes you. Think about it. You know that can't be what he's talking about. What does he mean? He says that when you see me again, you're going to have a joy that no one can take away, and then you're going to be able to ask. He says, ask in my name. Until now, you have not asked in my name, but now you will be able to, and your joy is going to be complete. What's the deal? Do you know why the disciples had not asked in his name prior to that instruction? You ever thought about this? Probably not, just me. Because they didn't even know it was a thing. My kids don't ever come and say, hey, Dad, I want to ask you in the name of Julie, like for this thing. That'd be kind of weird if they did. The reason they don't do it is because it's not a thing. They don't ask in the name of Julie, they don't ask in my name, they just ask. And what he's doing is this. What I believe he's doing is this. He says, now a way has been made for you to be reconciled once again to the Father, to be reconciled to the relationship for which you have been made. And this fulfills what was given to us, what every Hebrew kid would have known from Psalm 16, verse 11. You make known to me the paths of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. When Jesus said, when you see me again, it is because God is now with you, and that is where your joy is made full, and no one or no circumstance can take away that joy. That's the picture. That's the picture. What I begin to think about, and I'm going to give you the definition, is what causes this. And what we learn is that it is somehow the fact that we are made right with God, that his love for us, his great love for us, causes us joy. And that then leads us to where we live in a reconciled relationship to God. And a reconciled relationship to God doesn't live transactionally, but it lives in a way in which we offer and we give ourselves to him and for him, as we do in any relationship. We don't just say, oh, you came over and decorated my Christmas tree. That's why my heart is happy. What does that do to my kids? It diminishes them. When Julie says, this makes my heart happy, she says, I am satisfied and joy-filled because we are together. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. That's the promise of the gospel, and that's what Christmas has made available to us. So what I had to do is to get us a definition we're going to spend the next 4 weeks reflecting on and talking about and doing something about it. And so here's the definition that I came up with. And it's this, that joy is the resulting emotion. It is an emotion. You've got to feel joy. You can't go, I got joy. That's not going to get it. Something has to happen in you. It's the resulting emotion of being loved by God. Of being loved by God, understanding that you are the object of his hesed, his pursuing, steadfast, relentless love, such that it fuels life with him, a delight to be with him, because that is where your joy finds its fullness. And it drives and defines everything else. Now, I put an asterisk on there because I reserve the right to change that last word because I'm not sure yet. Think about it, that joy the resulting emotion of you being loved by God has the power to drive every other emotion that you feel, every other circumstance that you experience. So what I want us to see, and this is what we're going to spend the next few weeks on, I want us to see, number one, is joy as pervasive so that it does not become circumstantial. That's what we're doing today. I don't want you to bank on your circumstances to bring you joy when something else is available to you. The second thing is to see joy as formative so as not to become subjective. Do you know how weak joy gets when your circumstances have to be right, when it's not rainy or cold? How fickle joy becomes. Instead, I want for joy to be formative, to frame and to help you see such that your emotions become subjected to joy and not the other way around. That you can find joy in difficulty, in frustration, in sadness, in sorrow. Number three, the joy as sufficient. I want you to see joy as sufficient in this moment so that you don't become graspy. I love that word. You're always trying to take it from everybody else. Some of you end up being joy stealers. You need to be in quarantine for 14 more days so you can stop stealing people's joy, right? So we're not grasping, we're not trying to take, there's a sufficiency to it. I want us to see that. And number four, I want us to see joy as expressive so as not to become cynical. There's enough cynicism in the world today. There's enough people and enough circumstances that are going to threaten to steal your joy when something else has been made available to us that is unshakable by any circumstance in this world. The good news is the fact that the good news that brings great joy is the fact that God is with us. That is what he sent Jesus to do, to make sure that God's presence would be with you, because that is where the promise, in his presence, there is fullness of joy that is unshakable, that is untouchable by any circumstance in this world. So here's what I want us to do as we kind of close with this declaration. Some of you are here and you've never experienced a joy or trusted in a joy that is that powerful and that pervasive. You've lived your whole life and your circumstances had to be perfect or else you had no joy. And what I'd love for you to do is to receive and to trust God's love for you that he demonstrated in his son Jesus, that he made you right by forgiving you of your sins and reconciling you to the relationship for which you have been made, that God is not mad at you. In fact, he looks at you and he loves you and he cares about you and he's pleased with you, that you can know joy because you say, God is pleased and he is glad with me. That's what the gospel does for us, to trust Jesus and to receive his forgiveness. That's what provides us with a joy that is unshakable by anything else. For some of you, you've just forgotten that joy is available. That joy is available. You've just forgotten because you've been busy and your circumstances have been good for so long. You've just gotten dependent on them to bring you joy. And now with everything kind of getting undermined and the rug pulled out, you can't find it again. Maybe today's the time to say, you know what? I'm going to count it joy because you're with me. That's where the fullness of my joy is. I don't need anything else. You're going to begin to see this. And it's going to take us all 30 days to focus on this, to get us to Christmas the way we want to be. So maybe you've forgotten. And some of you, you're like getting this. Maybe what you need to do is you just need to be a joy bringer. All the people you're around that are stealing joy, you just need to be like all the time. Hey, you don't have to say anything. You can even have a mask on and still do it. Just bring joy to the people around you. What can you do to encourage them? Let people know that you are pleased with them. You're glad that God has made them. You're glad that they are in your world or in your life. To bring joy to the people around you. Y'all, we've been given an opportunity. When we see him, when we live in his presence, when we walk with him, he says that his joy is in us and our joy is complete and that no one can take it away. How different would your Christmas be if you could live in that for the next 30 days? Father, I just ask that as we pause and we confess, that this would rise up in us, that we will just declare, we'll count it joy, come every struggle, every battle, every hardship, every disappointment. We'll count it joy because you're with us there. God, I pray for some that there's been chronic disappointment, and some people, if we're really honest, have been disappointed with you. They asked in your name and it didn't turn out the way that they wanted. So, Father, my prayer is that you would meet them right there in that spot, in that space. And that, God, their request or their circumstance, their request being granted or their circumstance being changed would all of a sudden dim because of the fullness of joy that is found in your presence. God, I ask you to do that and let us feel it. Let joy rise up. We experience what it is to have a joy that no circumstance can threaten and that is available right now. And so, Father, I lift all of this to you as we declare these words, and I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. I'll ask if you'll stand in the room as we declare this together.